Sometimes the ones you pull back from the edge end up pulling you out too. For 30 years, Jack Callahan lived alone above Sandpoint, Idaho, where the snow stayed longer than most promises.
Hello?
At 59,
Someone there?
the former Navy SEAL
I
had
see
perfected a
something.
life made of routine, silence, and
Not
distance.
far now.
Not because the mountains were kind,
Just hold on.
but because the mountains did not ask him to explain what he'd done or
Not
what he'd
her.
left behind. Jack built that
Oh,
cabin
God,
like a man
no.
building a bunker for his own heart. Every log cut by hand, every beam set straight, the stove always ready. The windows facing east, catching the first thin light before the cold could bite too deep. It was enough. It had
Almost
always
there,
been
boy.
enough. Until one winter afternoon, the forest broke that agreement. A sound drifted down from the northwest slope, low and wounded. Not the cry of the wind, not the call of a wild animal living free. It was pain. The kind Jack knew too well. He told himself to ignore it. He told himself it wasn't his job anymore. Then he followed it anyway. And in a small clearing, stained red against white snow, Jack found a German Shepherd mother dog shot with buckshot, breathing like every breath might be her last. The kind of dog that wasn't lost. The kind of dog someone wanted gone. Jack should have walked away. Instead, he carried her home. He didn't know that before the night was over, 4 trembling puppies would scratch at his door, and the quiet life he'd been hiding inside for decades
Oh, no.
would finally come undone. The man who lived in snow, and a 30-year cut. Snow had fallen all night, quiet and heavy, sealing the Idaho timberline in white. Above Sandpoint, the mountains held their breath. Morning arrived without wind, with only a thin blue light spreading across the trees. Jack Callahan woke before the sky decided what color it wanted to be. He lay still for a moment, listening. The cabin spoke in small noises, wood settling, a faint tick from the stovepipe, the slow creak of a beam that had carried too many winters. Jack liked those sounds. They were honest. They did not ask questions. At 59, Jack's face looked carved rather than aged. His cheekbones were sharp, his jaw squared like it had been set that way on purpose. A close-cropped gray beard covered the scars time had left behind. His hair, once dark and thick, had thinned and turned the color of cold ash. His eyes were a pale gray blue that rarely softened. Not because he was cruel, but because softness had once cost him something he never got back. He moved with the habit of a man trained to wake up ready. Not rushed, not lazy, precise. Boots first, wool socks, thermal shirt, flannel. A heavy canvas jacket that smelled of smoke and pine resin. He kept his gear simple, the way he kept most things. Too much comfort made you forget what mattered. The cabin had no electricity. Jack did not miss it. Light came from a lantern and the narrow windows he'd placed on the east side, the same way a sailor learns where the sun rises and trusts it more than any clock. He stepped out of bed, crossed the room, and checked the stove. The coals were still alive, dull red under ash. He added kindling and 2 split logs from the basket near the wall. The fire caught fast, like it knew him. Coffee came next. He used an old percolator, blackened at the bottom, its handle wrapped with tape. When the first bitter smell rose, it filled the cabin like a memory that refused to leave. Jack stood by the window with the mug warming his hand. Outside, the clearing was smooth and untouched. No tire tracks, no human footprints. Only rabbit prints near the brush and a thin line where something small had cut across the snow in a hurry. That was how Jack wanted it. The valley was 30 miles away if you took the old logging road. In summer, a decent truck could make it. In winter, most people quit halfway. Jack liked that too. People in Sandpoint had names for him: Hermit, Ghost, Old Soldier who couldn't come home right. Jack did not correct them. Let them talk. Talk kept them at a distance. He had learned distance the hard way. A long time ago, he had been the kind of man who ran toward trouble without thinking. Navy SEAL. Years of training, then years of missions that never made the news and were not meant to. He had once been proud of it. Then pride turned into something else, something heavier. Guilt had a way of changing the shape of a man's days. Jack did not dream much anymore. When he did, he woke with his throat tight, as if he'd been underwater too long. After coffee, he pulled on gloves and went outside. Cold snapped at his lungs, sharp and clean. The air smelled like frozen sap. He walked to the woodpile, picked up the maul, and began splitting. Each swing was steady. Each crack of wood was a simple answer to a question no one asked. He worked until his shoulders warmed and his breath stopped smoking so thick. Then he carried a load inside, set it by the stove, and went back out for water. A creek ran a short hike from the cabin, half covered in ice, still moving beneath. Jack broke a thin sheet near the edge, filled 2 containers, and hauled them back. His hands stung through his gloves. Pain was fine. Pain was honest, too. Back inside, he checked the little pantry, counted what was left. Beans, rice, jerky, flour, dried apples. He could go another month easy, maybe 2. He had enough to survive. Survival had never been the problem. Living was harder. On a shelf above the small table, a framed photograph faced the room. The glass was scratched. The frame was cheap wood, worn at the corners. The picture showed a boy around 6, blonde hair sticking up in the front, cheeks pink from cold, smiling like he believed the world was safe. Ethan. Jack didn't touch the photo often. Touching it made the past feel close enough to grab him. He stared at the picture for 3 heartbeats, then looked away. There were days he told himself he would go down the mountain. Days he told himself he would stand on a porch somewhere, knock, and say the words he had avoided for too many years. I'm sorry. I should have come sooner. I didn't know how. But the truth was, he did know how. He just didn't believe he deserved it. Jack ate a small breakfast, then cleaned his knife, checked the locks, and moved through the cabin like he was inspecting a post. Old habits did not die. They just went quiet. Near noon, the sky brightened. Sunlight hit the snow so hard it hurt the eyes. Jack stepped outside again and scanned the tree line. He did this every day, without fail. Not because he feared wolves or bears. Those animals had rules. It was people Jack didn't trust. Once, people had been his team, brothers. Men who spoke in quick looks and shared the kind of loyalty that did not need words. Then a mission had gone wrong. A decision had been made. A second had passed. The wrong second. Jack carried that second like a stone in his chest. He walked the perimeter of the clearing, checking for anything new. A snapped branch. A disturbed drift. A scent that didn't belong. Near the western edge, he saw it. A faint track, almost erased by wind. Not human. Not deer. Wider than a fox. A straight line of prints that looked purposeful, like whatever made them knew where it was going. Jack crouched, gloved fingers hovering above the mark without touching it. He felt his pulse change, quick and alert, like his body remembered being needed. He stood slowly and stared into the trees. The woods stared back, calm and silent. For a long moment, Jack wanted to believe it meant nothing. a passing animal, a normal winter thing. But deep down, he knew better. The mountains had been quiet for years because he had arranged his life to keep it that way. Quiet never lasted forever. The cry in the trees and the shot mother dog. The afternoon light thinned early, as if winter was impatient. The snowfield outside Jack Callahan's cabin turned from white to steel, and the pines stood like dark guards in the fading day. Jack kept his eyes on the tree line. Those prints he'd found that morning had not left his mind. They were too straight, too sure. An animal moving with purpose, not panic. That kind of trail belonged to something that knew the land and had a reason to cross it. He tried to shake it off the way he shook off most things, with work. He split another round of wood, stacked it tight, checked the latch on the shed, and walked the perimeter again. His breath came out in hard bursts. The cold made his joints ache in a way that reminded him he was not the same man he'd been at 30. But his body still answered when he asked it to. Inside, he warmed a can of stew and ate standing up, the way he used to eat between tasks. He did not sit at the table unless he had to. Sitting invited thinking. Thinking invited the past. He rinsed the pot, set it to dry, and reached for his coat. Then he heard it. Not a howl. Not a bark. Not the sharp yip of a fox. A low, broken sound that didn't belong to the mountain. It came from the northwest slope, far enough that it could have been the wind, if it hadn't carried pain so clearly. Jack froze with one arm still in his sleeve. The sound came again, weaker, like something trying to call out and failing. He told himself to ignore it. He had lived up here by choice. He had earned his silence. The wilderness was not his responsibility anymore. But his chest tightened anyway, the way it did when he heard a man cough wrong in the dark, the way it did when someone on a radio said the words he never forgot. Man down. Jack closed his eyes for a beat. Not your job, he muttered, as if saying it out loud would make it true. The sound came a third time. His body moved before his mind agreed. He grabbed his coat, his pack, and the small medical pouch he kept out of habit. The pouch was old, the zipper worn, but the contents were neat. Gauze, tape, antiseptic, a curved needle and suture thread, a tourniquet. A few items he didn't talk about, even to himself. He stepped outside. Cold slapped his face and sharpened his focus. Jack moved into the trees with the quiet efficiency of a man trained to vanish. He kept his steps light, placed his boots where the snow would hold, not crunch. He followed the slope, reading the land the way he once read streets and rooftops. The sound led him deeper. It took time. Almost an hour of climbing through drifts and fallen limbs. His thighs burned. His lungs worked harder than they used to. Still, he didn't stop. He refused to stop. Stopping meant admitting age. Admitting age meant admitting limits. Limits were what got people hurt. Near a stand of young aspens, he saw it. Blood. Dark red against white snow. Too much of it, spread in spots like a trail of spilled paint. Jack's stomach turned, not from the sight, but from how familiar it felt. He crouched and touched the edge of one stain with a gloved finger. Still wet beneath the crust. Recent, he said, voice low. He followed the trail, slower now, scanning for movement, for anything that might rush him. A wounded animal could be desperate. A person who shot it could still be nearby. The blood led into a small clearing. That's where he saw her. A German shepherd lay on her side, half sunk into the drift. She was large and athletic, the kind built for endurance. Her coat was black along the back, with deep tan on the legs and face, but the fur was matted and stiff where blood had frozen. One ear lay flat, the other twitching weakly. Her eyes, a dark amber, were open but dull, like lanterns running out of oil. She looked about 4 or 5 years old, prime age, strong, not stray skinny, not sick. Shot. Jack moved closer with his hands open, palms down. His voice softened without him planning it. "Easy," he said. "I'm not here to finish it." The dog's chest rose and fell in shallow pulls. Each breath sounded wrong, thin and wet. Jack scanned her body and saw 3 small holes along her ribs. Buckshot entry points. The snow around her belly was stained wide. He swallowed hard. People didn't shoot a dog like this by accident. He checked the tree line again, then knelt. The dog tried to lift her head. A low, warning rumble started in her throat, but it died halfway, turning into a weak whine. Pain had stolen her strength. Jack's hands hovered over her, careful. He hated this moment. The moment where the right thing was obvious and still felt like stepping into a trap. Because once you chose to save something, you were responsible for it. And responsibility was a chain. Jack thought of the photograph inside his cabin. Ethan's bright face behind scratched glass. The way Jack had stared at it and then looked away. He had looked away too many times. He pulled off his coat and slid it under the dog's neck and shoulders, lifting with effort. She was heavy, dead weight and muscle. Jack grunted as he got her across his lap. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay, we're moving." He wrapped her in the coat, tight enough to keep warmth in, and stood. The weight dragged at him. Snow grabbed his boots. The cold turned every breath into a knife. Step by step, he hauled her downhill. The sky darkened fast. Wind rose through the trees, making branches creak like old bones. Jack's arms shook from strain, but he didn't stop. He counted steps like he used to count seconds. 20 more. 10 more. Don't drop her. By the time his cabin came into view, the last light had bled out of the world. He kicked the door open and pulled the dog inside. Warmth hit them both like a wave. The stove was still alive. Jack shoved fresh logs in, opened the damper, and got the fire roaring. The dog lay on the floor, breathing ragged. Jack ripped open the medical pouch and went to work like his hands remembered how. He cut away fur around the wounds, cleaned blood and ice, and pressed gauze down until his fingers ached. He spoke to her while he worked, not in baby talk, just steady words that anchored him. "You're not dying on my floor," he said. "Not today." He found the buckshot pellets under the skin, small and cruel. Some he could remove with forceps, others were deeper. He focused on stopping bleeding first, stitching second, keeping her warm, always. Time disappeared. The cabin filled with the smell of antiseptic and smoke. Jack's shirt stuck to his back with sweat despite the cold outside. His hands were steady. His mind was clear in a way it rarely was anymore. Near midnight, the dog's breathing eased a fraction. Not good, but better. Jack sat back on his heels, exhausted, and reached for his coffee mug without thinking. It was cold. He didn't care. Then he heard it, a soft scratching at the door. Jack's head snapped up. The dog on the floor didn't move, but her ear twitched. The scratching came again, followed by a tiny sound, high and pleading. Jack stood slowly and went to the door, rifle hanging on the wall within reach, though he didn't grab it yet. He opened the door a crack. 4 German Shepherd puppies stood on the porch. They were small, maybe 8 weeks old, legs too big for their bodies, coats fluffy and dark with tan eyebrows like little commas. Their eyes were bright, nervous, locked on Jack with a fear that trembled in their whole posture. Snow clung to their whiskers. Their paws were red from cold. One pup stepped forward and sniffed the air, then let out a thin whine and looked past Jack into the cabin, toward their mother. Jack's throat tightened. He should have shut the door. He knew that. This was how a quiet life broke apart. One choice, then another. Then suddenly you were responsible for 5 lives instead of 1. But the smallest pup shivered so hard it nearly fell over. Jack exhaled slowly. "All right," he said, voice rough. "Come on, fast." He opened the door wide. One by one, the pups darted inside, slipping on the wood floor, scrambling toward the injured dog. They pressed against her body, whining, noses pushing into her fur as if willing her to wake up. Jack shut the door and leaned his forehead against the wood. The cabin was no longer empty, and the mountain, it seemed, had finally found a way to reach him. The cabin learned to laugh, and a new unit formed. Jack Callahan did not sleep that night. He tried, once, for the sake of logic. He sat on the edge of his narrow bed, boots still on, and told himself that closing his eyes for 10 minutes would help him think clearer. But the cabin was no longer the quiet place where he could pretend the world had forgotten him. Now it breathed with 5 lives. The injured mother dog lay near the stove, where the heat was strongest, her body stretched out like a fallen shadow. 4 puppies huddled against her ribs, small and shaking, warming themselves by touch the way babies do when they have no other choice. Every few minutes, one of them let out a tiny squeak or a thin whine, or a desperate little hiccup of sound that made Jack's shoulders tighten. He kept moving because stillness felt dangerous. Jack fed the fire, then checked the bandages, then fed the fire again, as if the flames were a duty post. He cleaned blood from the floor with hot water and soap, scrubbing until his knuckles ached. He was not disgusted. He had seen worse. What unsettled him was how quickly his hands fell into a familiar rhythm. Stabilize, control bleeding, prevent infection, keep warm, monitor breathing. It was the same checklist he had once used for men. He hated that it fit so easily here. The mother dog's coat, up close, was beautiful in a battered way. Black along the spine, dark sable on the shoulders, tan on the legs and muzzle. Her fur was thick, built for snow, but clumped and stiff where blood had frozen it. One ear was nicked at the tip, an old scar, and her muzzle held faint gray around the whiskers that suggested she'd seen a few hard seasons. She was not old, though. 4, maybe 5. Prime. A working dog's body, all muscle and endurance. Her eyes opened once in the middle of the night, amber and wary, and Jack froze like he'd been caught doing something he wasn't supposed to do. "Easy," he said quietly, keeping his voice low and even. "You're safe. For now." The dog's gaze stayed on him, sharp despite the pain. She did not snarl. She did not lunge. She simply watched, breathing in short pulls, as if measuring him. Jack knew that look. He had worn it himself. The puppies were a different storm. In the first hour inside the cabin, they tried to climb everything. The chair legs, Jack's boots, each other. They tumbled and slipped on the wooden floor, little paws scrabbling, nails clicking like rain. Their coats were fluffy with puppy-soft fur, mostly black with tan eyebrows and cheeks, and each had its own small signature if you paid attention. One male had a white patch on his chest, like a medal someone had pinned there by accident. Another pup had a darker face and an intense stare that looked too serious for a creature that still smelled like milk. The smallest female had a crooked ear that wouldn't decide which way it wanted to fold. The last pup moved carefully, studying the room before taking a step, as if curiosity had to be earned. Jack did not want to name them. Naming made things real. Real meant attachment. Attachment meant loss. But it didn't take long before he needed words that weren't, "Hey," or "No," or "Stop chewing that." At dawn, when the sky finally turned pale and the cold outside sharpened again, Jack opened his pantry and found a half-used bag of powdered milk. He mixed it with warm water in a metal bowl and added a spoon of rendered fat he kept for cooking. He didn't know if it was perfect, but it was something, and the puppy's hunger was not polite. They latched onto the bowl like a pack of tiny wolves, tails wagging hard enough to sway their whole bodies. One of them sneezed milk through his nose and looked offended, then went right back to drinking like the world would end if he paused. Jack actually made a sound that might have been a laugh. It came out rough, more breath than humor, but it was there. The cabin heard it. The cabin remembered it. "All right," he muttered, half to himself. "You're Finn." The bold pup with the white chest looked up, milk on his chin, and wagged harder, as if he'd been waiting for that exact permission to exist. The smallest female, the one who shivered even near the stove, kept pressing close to the mother dog's side. Jack watched her crawl over her siblings to tuck into the warmest place she could find, then release a long sigh like a tired old woman. He shook his head. "And you're Daisy," he said. The serious-eyed pup, the one who held his head a little higher than the rest and watched Jack's hands like he was memorizing every move, stepped toward Jack's medical pouch and sniffed it, then sat down beside it as if guarding it. Jack felt his throat tighten at the sight. "Ranger," he said softly, surprised at the name that came out. He did not tell himself why that word mattered. The cautious pup with the careful steps circled the cabin once, then stopped near the door and stared at the crack beneath it, listening to the wind outside. Jack recognized that kind of listening, the kind that never fully relaxes. He lowered his voice again. "Lily," he decided, because the world needed at least one gentle name in a room like this. That left the mother dog. Jack sat on the floor near her, slow, letting her see his hands. He pressed 2 fingers lightly against her neck to feel heat and pulse. She flinched once but didn't pull away. Her eyes tracked him, then flicked to the puppies, then back to Jack. A question lived in that look. Not gratitude, not surrender. Something more direct. "Who are you, and why are you doing this?" Jack swallowed. He stared into her eyes and felt a pressure behind his ribs he hadn't felt in years. "Harper," he said at last, the name landing like a quiet promise. "That'll do." Harper blinked once, slow. Then, for the first time, she let her head rest fully on the floor, not collapsing, but choosing to stop fighting for a moment. Jack exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since midnight. Over the next days, the cabin found a new rhythm. Jack woke early out of habit, but now he woke to tiny paws on his blanket and a puppy breath in his face that smelled like milk and trouble. Finn became bold enough to steal socks, Daisy followed Jack like a shadow that still believed in people. Ranger sat watch near Harper whenever Jack changed bandages, tense and loyal, like a small soldier. Lily explored in quiet loops, then returned to the stove, satisfied as if she'd mapped the world and found it safe enough for now. Jack spoke to them as he worked. Not because he liked talking, because silence felt different now. Silence felt like a choice again, not a prison. Harper grew stronger in small steps. She drank water from Jack's hand with cautious patience. She held his gaze without fear. The pain was still there, written in the way her muscles tightened when Jack touched near the wounds. But she didn't bite. She didn't snap. She endured. And that endurance did something to Jack. He had spent years convincing himself he was done protecting anything that could break his heart. Now his cabin smelled like smoke and antiseptic and wet fur. Now it echoed with small sounds that refused to be ignored. Now there were 5 sets of breathing in the dark. Jack didn't call it family. He didn't use that word. But when he lay back on his bed at night and listened to the puppies settle beside their mother, when he watched the firelight flicker across Harper's healing ribs, he felt something shift inside him, something he had kept locked away for 30 years. Responsibility didn't feel like a chain. It felt like a doorway. And for the first time in a long time, Jack didn't step back from it. Hired guns, a warning slip, and the call that woke the past. Harper took her first steps outside on a morning that looked harmless. The sun sat low and pale, and the snow glittered like ground glass. Jack watched from the porch, arms folded over his canvas jacket, breath fogging the air. Harper moved slowly, testing each paw as if the world had turned unfamiliar overnight. Her ribs were still tender under the healed stitches, and her gait carried a slight hitch. But she stood with dignity, head lifted, ears alert. Finn, Daisy, Ranger, and Lily bounded around her like sparks escaping a fire, too young to understand how close death had been. Jack told himself the sight was only practical. If Harper could walk, she could leave. If she could leave, his cabin could become quiet again. Yet he found himself staring a second too long, as if memorizing the shape of a piece he didn't trust to last. The first shot cracked in the distance just after noon. It wasn't the sound itself that made Jack go still. It was the spacing, the deliberate pause between blasts, not the careless pop of a hunter taking one clean animal in season, but the rhythm of someone working a list. Jack's body answered before his thoughts formed. His shoulders tightened, his jaw set, his eyes narrowed toward the ridgeline. Harper froze too, muscles locking, nose lifted to taste the air. The puppies stopped mid-wrestle. Even Finn, the fearless thief of socks, went silent. A second shot followed, then a third. Far enough away that the sound arrived softened by trees, but close enough to tell Jack it wasn't happening down in the valley. It was up here, in his world. He brought the dogs inside without raising his voice. He didn't need to. Harper moved first, ushering her pups like a mother who had learned hard lessons. Jack closed the door and slid the bolt. He hated that he still had a bolt, hated that he still used it. He told himself it was for bears. He knew better. He set a kettle on the stove, not because he wanted tea, but because routine kept panic from turning into mistakes. Then he checked his old trail camera by the window, the one he used to watch the clearing for storms and trespassers. Nothing. Just snow. Just trees. Just the quiet lie of distance. The truck arrived near dusk, rattling up the logging road like a metal cough. Jack recognized the sound before he saw it. An old Ford with a loose exhaust and tires that complained on ice. Only one man drove up here in winter with that kind of stubbornness. Earl Watkins stepped out, wearing a heavy parka the color of wet bark. He was in his late 60s, thick in the shoulders, with a face roughened by wind and sun. His mustache was white and bristled like a brush, and his eyes were small but sharp, the kind that missed nothing, even when he pretended not to look. Earl ran a small repair shop down in town and did odd supply runs for the few backcountry cabins that still existed. Jack had met him once years ago at a gas station, both of them men who spoke little and remembered too much. Earl wasn't warm, but he was steady. In the mountains, steady mattered more. Jack met him outside before he could reach the porch. The cold bit at their noses. Earl didn't smile. He held a cardboard box against his chest and set it down carefully, as if the weight of it meant something beyond supplies. "Brought you some feed and dry goods," Earl said, voice low. "Figured the road might close again." His gaze flicked past Jack toward the door. "And I heard shots." Jack didn't lie. He never liked lying. "I heard them." Earl's jaw worked like he was chewing on a thought that tasted bad. "It's not hunting," he said. "Not legal. Not even close." He took off one glove and rubbed his knuckles, a nervous habit in a man who didn't look nervous. "There's a new outfit sniffing around. Paid men. Not locals, not the usual idiots. They're being pointed." "Pointed by who?" Jack asked, already knowing the answer would be money. Earl's mouth tightened. "A developer. Name's Grant Harlow." He said it like a curse, then added, "City guy. Clean boots. Wants to turn this whole stretch into a fancy winter place. Cabins with hot tubs, snowmobile tours. Wilderness experience sold by the weekend." Earl's eyes hardened. "He's been tossing cash around like it's birdseed, paying folks to clear out anything that scares tourists." Jack felt the word clear hit him like a punch. Clear meant erase. "Wolves," he said. "Wolves, cougars, bears," Earl replied. Then his gaze sharpened, pinning Jack with a question he didn't speak aloud. "And dogs that look too much like wolves." Jack's throat went tight. Harper had been shot for being in the way, not for being feral. A working shepherd didn't wander into the backcountry and get buckshot by accident. Someone had wanted her gone. Maybe they had chased her. Maybe she had gotten between them and something else. Either way, it was not random. The mountain hadn't reached into his cabin by chance. It had dragged him into a fight. Earl stepped closer, voice dropping. "You need to be careful, Jack. Your land sits right where Harlow wants to run his access road. He's buying up parcels in the valley. Some folks said no. Some folks didn't get asked twice." Jack stared at the snow at his boots, feeling the old familiar hum under his skin. The part of him that used to plan exits and angles and contingencies was awake now. It didn't feel good. It felt inevitable. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, though he already knew Earl wasn't here to offer a menu of choices. Earl nodded toward the darkening woods. "Don't make noise about it down in town. Don't trust anyone who suddenly wants to be friendly. And if you got something you're hiding in there," he tipped his chin at the cabin door, "keep it close." His eyes softened for half a second, then went hard again. "They're paying by body count. 500 a head, last I heard. Dead or trapped. Folks like that don't care what's right.
After Earl left, the cabin felt smaller. Jack moved through it, checking corners like it was a room in a hostile building. Harper stood near the stove, watching him. Her eyes weren't dull anymore. They were clear and aware. She didn't whine. She didn't ask. She simply observed, as if she understood that danger had returned and this man would have to decide what kind of man he still was. That night, the wind rose. Snow tapped the windows like fingernails. Jack sat at the table with his coffee and tried to read an old paperback, but the words slid off his mind. Near midnight, he heard a soft scrape at the door. Not paws, not wind. A deliberate sound, brief and controlled.
Jack's hand went to the rifle hanging by the wall. He waited. The scrape came again, then silence. He moved without turning on the lamp. He cracked the door just enough to look down. A folded slip of paper lay on the porch, held in place by a small stone. No footprints he could see. That didn't mean none existed. It meant whoever delivered it knew how to hide their trail. Jack picked it up and brought it inside, holding it by the edges as if it might burn. The paper smelled faintly of gasoline and cheap tobacco. 4 words were scrawled in block letters, uneven, like someone writing with their off hand. "We know you're hiding them. 3 days." Jack read it twice, then a third time, as if repetition could turn threat into something manageable. He felt no rush of fear. Fear was loud. What he felt was colder, quieter. The same sensation he used to feel before a breach, when he knew the next minutes would matter more than the last month. He didn't sleep. He moved. He mounted 2 trail cameras in trees facing the clearing, angled to catch headlights. He checked his old handheld recorder and set it near the window. He dug out a weatherproof case and copied everything he had. Photos of Harper's wounds, any tracks, any gunshot times he'd noted, onto a small flash drive. Evidence was a weapon too, if you knew how to use it. Then he packed a go bag for Harper and the pups. Blankets, food, water, a small first aid kit. He mapped an escape route through the canyon where the snow drifted deep enough to hide scent, a route a dog could manage if she was willing. Last, Jack pulled out a phone he rarely powered on. It wasn't a smartphone. It was an old, scuffed device with a cracked corner, the kind he'd carried in sand and salt water long ago. He stared at it for a long time. Calling meant reopening doors he had spent decades sealing. Calling meant admitting he couldn't do this alone. Harper rose and limped closer, then sat beside his knee, her warmth pressed against him. Not pleading, not demanding, just present. As if she was saying, "You're not alone anymore, whether you like it or not." Jack exhaled slowly and dialed. The line rang twice. A man answered with a voice that sounded like gravel and sleep. "Yeah." Jack's throat tightened. "Mike," he said. "It's Jack Callahan." Silence stretched so long Jack thought the call had dropped. Then the voice turned sharp, awake. "Jack," the man said, disbelief wrapped in caution. "I thought you were gone." "I was," Jack replied, "but I need help. There are hired men up here. They're coming in 3 days, and I've got 5 shepherds in my cabin." He glanced at Harper, then at the pups curled by the stove. "I can prove what's happening. I just need the right people to listen before someone gets killed." On the other end, a breath, then a steadier tone. "Tell me everything," Mike Brennan said, like an order and a promise at once. Jack began to speak, and with each detail he shared, something inside him locked into place. He wasn't running anymore. He was preparing. Outside, the wind screamed through the pines. Inside, the fire held steady, and 5 dogs breathed in the warmth Jack had chosen to defend. Headlights in the snow, and the way back home. The third night arrived with a sky so dark it looked solid. Snow fell in thin, dry flakes that didn't drift much, just whispered down through the pines and disappeared into the ground. Jack Callahan kept the cabin lights off. He had learned long ago that darkness could be cover, and cover could be mercy. Inside, the stove burned low, steady, and the warmth stayed trapped behind thick logs and tighter habits. Harper lay near the hearth with her head up, ears angled toward every sound. The pups slept in a loose pile, but even in sleep they twitched and sighed, as if their bodies knew danger was walking closer. Jack sat at the table with his old rifle within reach and his camera feed running on a small screen powered by a backup battery. He didn't stare at the screen the way a nervous man would. He watched it the way a trained man watched a doorway. Calm. Not because he felt safe, but because panic wasted time. The first sign wasn't headlights. It was the silence shifting. The forest had a normal winter voice, even when it sounded quiet. Branches creaked. Wind brushed needles. Snow slid off limbs in soft thumps. Tonight, those sounds faded, replaced by a stillness that felt arranged. Jack's skin tightened. Harper's muzzle lifted. Her lips didn't curl, but a low sound rolled in her throat. Not a growl of anger, more a warning to the world that she was awake. Then came the engines. Not one, several. Low gears, careful throttle, tires crunching at intervals as if the drivers had practiced being quiet. Jack saw the first set of lights through the trees, then another, then a wider spread. A convoy moving like it owned the mountain. He reached over and tapped the recorder. Red light, rolling. A second camera pointed out the window, aimed at the clearing where vehicles would have to funnel. He had placed those cameras 2 days ago, and he'd checked the angles twice. Evidence mattered. Evidence turned threats into charges. He didn't wake the pups. He didn't need to. Finn stirred first, always the bold one, ears popping up like he'd heard a whistle. Daisy crawled closer to Harper, pressing into her warmth. Ranger lifted his head and stared at the door with a seriousness that didn't belong on a puppy face. Lily didn't move at all, just opened her eyes and watched, silent and alert, as if she'd been born knowing that loudness was a luxury. Jack stood and pulled on his coat. He didn't put on a hat. He wanted them to see his face. A man in the dark was easy to call a threat. A man in the light, standing on his own porch, was a witness. He opened the door and stepped outside, leaving it unlatched behind him in case Harper needed to move fast. The cold slapped him hard. His breath turned white and hung for a heartbeat before breaking apart. He walked to the edge of the porch and stopped with his boots planted shoulder-width apart. A stance that said he would not run. His rifle stayed slung, but low, not aimed. He wasn't trying to start a firefight. He was trying to stop one. The first truck rolled into the clearing and stopped. Then a second eased in behind it. Headlights flared across the snow, throwing long shadows. Jack's cabin, his woodpile, his fence line, all washed in hard light. Doors opened. Men stepped out. There were 5 of them, maybe 6. Heavy coats, beanies pulled low, faces half hidden. One carried a cage trap in the back of a pickup. Another held something long and dark that could only be a rifle. The man who moved like a leader came forward. He was tall, broad in the chest, with a shaved head that shone faintly in the headlight glare. A thick beard framed his mouth, trimmed close like a man who wanted control over every detail. His eyes were pale, almost colorless. He wore a clean hunting jacket, too clean for the work he was doing, and the way he walked told Jack he was used to people stepping aside. "You Callahan?" the man asked. His voice was calm, practiced. Jack didn't answer the question the way the man wanted. "You're on private land," Jack said, tone steady. "Turn around." The leader smiled, thin and humorless. "We're here for the dogs." He nodded toward the cabin as if he could see through logs and walls. "Hand them over and this stays easy." Jack kept his hands visible. He raised his voice just enough to carry. "Everything is being recorded, audio and video. You fire a shot, you threaten me, you step 1 foot closer with a weapon, and your faces go public before sunrise." A few of the men shifted. Not fear, exactly, more uncertainty. They had expected an old hermit. They hadn't expected a man who spoke like he'd been trained to keep his head when the world screamed. The leader's smile didn't change. "You're alone," he said. "Nobody's coming up here." Jack glanced past the trucks into the trees. He didn't look like he was searching. He looked like he was waiting for a cue. "You sure about that?" For a moment, nothing happened. Snow fell. Engines idled. The leader took one more step forward, testing. Jack didn't move. His voice stayed even. "Last warning. Leave." A beam of light snapped on from the tree line to the right, then another from the left, then several more. Headlamps, flashlights, the harsh white of handheld spotlights. Figures appeared in the snow like they had risen out of the mountain itself. Ranchers, loggers, a couple of older men in worn coats and work gloves. Earl Watkins stood among them, shoulders square, his white mustache bright in the light. He held a phone up, filming. Beside him was a younger woman with a ranger jacket, tall and athletic, her dark hair braided tight under a beanie, a badge patch visible on her arm. Her face was wind-reddened and focused, eyes narrowed with the kind of calm that came from training. She didn't point a gun. She pointed a flashlight and a radio. The leader's head turned, quick. His men hesitated. The clearing no longer felt like theirs. A new sound rose, deep and mechanical, growing fast. Rotor blades. The air began to thrum. A helicopter swept over the ridgeline, its searchlight cutting through the falling snow, turning night into a stark white stage. The beam pinned the trucks, the men, the trap cage, the rifles. Then came the vehicles. Federal SUVs and a marked truck pushing up the logging road with lights flashing. Not screaming sirens, just enough to say, "We are here, and you are caught." Doors slammed, commands echoed. "Hands where we can see them! Drop it! On your knees!" The leader's face tightened for the first time. His pale eyes darted, calculating. Too late. 2 agents moved in, fast and controlled, and took his arms. One of his men tried to step back. A flashlight snapped onto him. "Don't!" the ranger woman barked, voice sharp as ice. He froze. Jack didn't cheer. He didn't move. He just stood there, letting the scene unfold the way it needed to. When the agents cuffed the men and began photographing the traps and weapons, an older federal agent approached Jack. He had a square face and tired eyes, the kind a man gets after decades of seeing what people will do for money. His hair was iron gray, clipped short. He spoke with respect, not friendliness. "You Jack Callahan?" Jack nodded once. "We got your files," the agent said. "Brennan sent everything through. Clean chain. Good work." He glanced at the cabin. "You got animals inside?" "5 shepherds," Jack said. "Mother's wounded. Pups are young." "We'll get a vet team up," the agent replied. "And we'll find placement." His eyes held Jack's a beat longer. "You did the right thing." Jack didn't answer. The words sat in his chest like something he didn't know how to carry. When the lights and voices faded, when the trucks were towed and the men were driven down the mountain, Jack finally went back inside. Harper stood in the doorway, body tense, pups behind her like a line of small soldiers. She had watched everything without making a sound. Jack knelt, slow, and rested his palm against her neck. "It's over," he whispered, though he knew better than to trust endings. "For now." Weeks passed, and the snow softened at the edges. News traveled upward the way smoke did, slow but unavoidable. Grant Harlow's project went quiet, then darker. Investigations, charges. People in town started saying different things about the mountain hermit. Some said he was a hero. Jack didn't like that word either. Heroes didn't leave their sons behind. A rescue farm took Harper and the pups, a reputable place with heated barns and acres of fenced land, run by a woman named Marlene Shaw, a sturdy, warm-eyed grandmother type with silver hair cropped short and hands that moved with gentle confidence. She spoke plainly, thanked Jack once, and promised the dogs would be safe. Jack watched Harper load into the transport crate, her amber eyes meeting his. Not gratitude, recognition. Then she turned toward her pups, and Jack understood that her job was not to stay. Her job was to live. Jack drove down the mountain the next week for the first time in years without telling himself it was only for supplies. He volunteered at the farm because his hands needed work and his heart needed something honest to do. He cleaned stalls, hauled feed, learned the names of animals he pretended not to care about. The pups grew fast. Finn stayed bold. Daisy stayed sweet. Ranger stayed watchful. Lily stayed thoughtful. Harper's limp faded into a memory. And then, one afternoon, a truck pulled into the farm lot and stopped too carefully, like the driver had been rehearsing the moment. A man stepped out. Not a boy. A man in his late 20s, tall and lean with broad shoulders, sandy blonde hair cut short, and a face that carried Jack's sharp jaw in a softer shape. He wore a worn denim jacket and held himself like someone trying to look calm while his insides shook. His eyes were blue, clear, and wary, in a way that made Jack feel suddenly unsteady. Jack knew him anyway. Ethan Callahan stood a few yards away, hands empty at his sides. He looked at Jack like he was seeing a stranger and a memory at the same time. His voice came out rough, like it hurt to use it. "Dad," he said. Jack's chest tightened so hard he thought he might not breathe. He didn't step back. For the first time in 30 years, he didn't look away. Some stories end with a rescue. This one ends with a reminder. Sometimes God does not send thunder or signs in the sky. Sometimes he sends a quiet cry in the woods, a wounded mother, 4 small lives, and one tired man who thinks his heart is already closed. And when that man chooses compassion anyway, the miracle is not just that the dogs survive. The miracle is that something inside him wakes up again. In everyday life, most of us are not facing headlights on a mountain road. We're facing smaller battles. A hard morning, a lonely evening, a family wound that never fully healed, a neighbor we keep avoiding. a regret we keep carrying like a stone. But God can use the small moments too. One choice to be kind, one choice to stop running, one choice to protect what is right in front of us. If this story touched you, let it be a gentle nudge. If there is someone you need to forgive, take one step. If there is someone you need to call, do not wait for the perfect day. If you see a soul, human or animal, that needs help, do what you can, even if it feels small. God multiplies small acts of love into something bigger than we can see. If you believe in second chances, type Amen in the comments. Tell us where you were watching from, and share a moment when you felt God's hand guiding you through a hard season. And if you want more stories that bring hope, healing, and heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs a little light today. May God bless you and your home. May He protect your family. May He bring peace to your heart and strength to your days. And may He keep watch over every viewer listening right now, in Jesus' name. Amen.